Ohio, 2018. The pre-dawn chill clung to the sterile air inside Northgate Correctional Facility. It was a time usually marked by the low hum of ventilation, the distant clang of steel, the shuffling feet of early risers, the subdued symphony of incarceration. But this morning near Cell 117 in D Block, an unnatural stillness prevailed, a heavy silence that felt more like a held breath than peace. Officer Frank Miller, a veteran guard whose steps were usually brisk and purposeful, found his pace slowing as he approached the cell on his routine morning rounds. Something felt off. The usual muted sounds from within 117 were absent. He paused at the heavy steel door, peering through the narrow observation slit. What he saw made him freeze, his hand hovering over the key slot. Sprawled on the cold concrete floor near the lower bunk lay the inert form of Marcus Jones. At 42, Jones, known universally within these walls as King, was more than just an inmate. He was an institution, a man whose influence radiated far beyond his cell, built on years of navigating the brutal hierarchy of prison life while serving a long sentence for racketeering and organized crime. Even in death, his large frame commanded space, but the usual aura of power was gone, replaced by a disturbing stillness. His face, usually set in a hard, calculating expression, was slack and unnaturally pale, tinged with a grayish hue under the harsh fluorescent lights. Miller's training kicked in, pushing past the initial shock. He unlocked the cell door, the mechanism sounding unnervingly loud in the quiet corridor. Stepping inside, the metallic tang of stale air mixed with something else, something faintly coppery and wrong. He approached the body cautiously. There were no obvious signs of violence, no visible wounds or blood pools that would indicate a stabbing or beating. Yet the way Marcus lay was all wrong, an awkward twist to the limbs, a finality that spoke of more than sleep. Leaning closer, Miller's eyes caught the subtle details his initial glance had missed. A faint, thin, almost imperceptible discoloration circled Marcus's thick neck, a bruised furrow against the dark skin. Above it, the veins stood out, engorged and prominent. Asphyxiation, strangulation. The realization hit Miller with cold certainty. His voice was tight but steady as he raised his radio, the crackle slicing through the silence. He reported the discovery, requesting immediate backup and notifying the shift supervisor. The response was swift. Within minutes, the quiet corridor echoed with the thud of heavy boots as more guards arrived, their faces grim, senses on high alert. The scene quickly transitioned from eerie quiet to controlled chaos. Soon after, Dr. Evelyn Reed, the prison physician, arrived, her medical bag in hand. Her movements were brisk and professional as she knelt beside the body, ignoring the surrounding tension. A quick check for vital signs confirmed the obvious. She noted the ligature mark on the neck, the petechial hemorrhages in the eyes barely visible in the dim light, the overall presentation consistent with death by strangulation. Her preliminary estimation placed the time of death somewhere between 4 and 6 hours prior, placing it squarely in the dead of night. As the guards secured the cell and the immediate area, a question arose. Where was the cellmate? Marcus Jones hadn't occupied cell 117 alone. Jamal Hayes, a young man of 23, was assigned to the upper bunk. A quick check with the duty officer confirmed Hayes wasn't present. He had been assigned to the late-night shift in the prison kitchen and, according to the logs, had not yet clocked out or returned to his cell block. His absence immediately added another layer of complexity and suspicion to the scene. Before long, Detective Lena Washington arrived. Representing the state's special unit for investigating serious crimes within correctional facilities, she carried an air of calm authority. Her reputation preceded her, meticulous, unflappable, and relentless in pursuit of the truth. She took in the scene with observant eyes, her gaze sweeping over the body, the cell's contents, 2 bunks, a small metal desk bolted to the wall, a shared toilet and sink unit, and the assembled personnel. She noted the lack of apparent struggle. The cell, while cramped and grim, wasn't overtly disturbed. Bunks were made, personal items seemed in place. It suggested the victim was either killed quickly, perhaps in his sleep, or that the scene had been carefully managed post-mortem. Washington's attention then turned to the corridor outside the cell. Mounted high on the wall, a surveillance camera covered this section of D Block. Or it should have. Its lens was neatly covered with a piece of dark, industrial-looking tape, rendering it useless. Just then, Warden Samuel Davis arrived, his expression a mixture of concern and bureaucratic defensiveness. When Washington pointedly inquired about the camera, the warden explained it away as a recent technical issue. A work order for repair, he assured her, had been submitted several days prior. Detective Washington listened impassively, but her mind registered the information with sharp skepticism. A high-profile inmate murdered. A key surveillance camera conveniently out of commission. It felt far too neat, raising immediate questions about either profound institutional incompetence or something far more deliberate. The investigation had barely begun, but the shadows of conspiracy and cover-up were already gathering in the cold, quiet air of D-Block. The scene was secured, the forensic team was en route, and Detective Washington prepared herself for a long, intricate dive into the secrets held within Northgate's formidable walls. Detective Washington set up a temporary workspace in a small, sterile office near the D-Block warden's area. The institutional beige walls seemed to absorb sound, creating a quiet space for her to delve into the lives contained within the manila folders laid out before her. The files detailed the official histories of Marcus Jones and Jamal Hayes, painting starkly contrasting portraits. Marcus Jones's file was thick, chronicling a life enmeshed in the criminal justice system. Multiple convictions spanning decades, escalating charges from petty theft to assault, racketeering, and finally the conviction that landed him in Northgate with a lengthy sentence. Notes described him as intelligent, manipulative, a known leader within the inmate population, possessing significant influence and a history of violence when challenged. He was a man who understood power dynamics implicitly and wielded them effectively behind bars. Jamal Hayes' file was considerably thinner. This was his first incarceration for a serious felony. Carjacking with an element of force involved. Prior offenses were minor misdemeanors. His prison record noted him as generally compliant, quiet, keeping mostly to himself but also observant. Psychological evaluations painted him as potentially vulnerable due to his youth and relative inexperience with prison life, yet possessing a degree of street smarts. He wasn't a hardened criminal like Jones, but rather someone whose life had taken a sharp, damaging turn. Jamal Hayes was escorted into the office directly from the prison kitchen, still wearing his kitchen fatigues. He looked utterly drained, dark circles under his eyes betraying a sleepless night even before the morning's discovery. Fear radiated from him, a palpable tension in the way he held himself, his gaze darting nervously around the small room before settling on the floor. Detective Washington observed him quietly for a moment before beginning her questions. His account of the previous night matched the initial report. He confirmed finishing his shift late, returning to cell 117 sometime around midnight. He described finding Marcus already in the lower bunk, turned towards the wall, seemingly asleep. Exhausted from the long hours in the hot kitchen, Jamal stated he simply climbed into his own bunk and fell asleep almost immediately. He claimed he noticed nothing unusual, no sounds, no disturbance, until the commotion outside the cell door woke him abruptly hours later to the horrifying reality. When Washington gently probed the nature of his relationship with Marcus Jones, Jamal's nervousness intensified. His gaze dropped, his hands fidgeted. He explained haltingly that Marcus had taken him under his wing shortly after his arrival at Northgate. He described Marcus as providing protection, shielding him from the predatory elements that often targeted young, new inmates. Marcus, he said, kept others away from him. Washington listened patiently, her experience telling her that such arrangements in prison were rarely altruistic. Protection invariably came at a price, often a steep one, involving servitude, coerced favors, or worse. Jamal's vague description, invisible discomfort, suggested a complex, likely exploitative dynamic, one he was clearly reluctant to elaborate on. Washington sensed a deep well of fear and possibly shame beneath his hesitant words. Seeking another perspective, Detective Washington located Officer Frank Miller, the guard who had discovered the body. Away from the immediate crime scene, Miller seemed more composed but retained an undercurrent of tension. When asked about the relationship between Jones and Hayes, Miller confirmed Jamal's account of Marcus's possessiveness. He described how Jones had effectively isolated Hayes, warning other inmates to keep their distance. Miller spoke of Marcus's control over the younger man with a tone that bordered on disgust. Yet Washington detected something else too, a flicker of irritation, maybe even resentment or jealousy, that seemed slightly out of place for a guard merely reporting observations. It was a nuance she filed away mentally. Later, Washington made her way to the prison infirmary to speak with Dr. Evelyn Reed. The infirmary was an oasis of relative quiet and cleanliness amidst the harshness of the prison. Dr. Reed, composed and professional, provided the standard medical details already noted at the scene. Then she added a piece of information that shifted the entire investigation onto a new axis. Just days earlier, Marcus Jones had received the results of a routine health screening. The test had come back positive for HIV. Dr. Reed recounted his reaction vividly, disbelief quickly turning into explosive anger. He had shouted, cursed, accused the lab of incompetence, demanded immediate retesting, proclaiming it impossible. His outburst had been so severe that security had nearly been called. It was clear the diagnosis had profoundly destabilized the otherwise controlled and imposing man. Dr. Reed then added another crucial detail. As part of ongoing health monitoring, Jamal Hayes had also been tested about a week prior to Marcus receiving his results. Jamal's HIV test had come back negative. This stark contrast, the recently diagnosed furious victim and the negative-tested dependent cellmate, instantly opened up a Pandora's box of potential motives: fear of infection, accusations of transmission, jealousy, betrayal, revenge. The revelation of Marcus's HIV status cast the relationship between the two cellmates, and potentially others, in a volatile new light. Detective Washington absorbed this critical information. The complex web of relationships and potential resentments within Northgate's walls suddenly appearing darker and more tangled than before. Detective Washington understood that official files and staff interviews only provided a skeletal outline of prison life. The real flesh and blood of relationships, power plays, and hidden economies existed in the inmate population itself. Navigating this world required caution and discretion. Through carefully worded inquiries and by leveraging existing knowledge of the prison's social structure, she identified a potential source: Deshaun Williams, an older inmate known universally as Books. Williams was serving a long sentence but maintained a reputation for being observant, intelligent, and, most importantly, someone who knew the intricate workings of Northgate's underworld without being a major player himself. Arranging a conversation required careful maneuvering to avoid drawing unwanted attention. They eventually met in a relatively low-traffic corner of the prison library, surrounded by shelves of worn paperbacks, the scent of old paper a strange contrast to the pervasive institutional smell. Books, a man whose eyes held the weary wisdom of decades spent behind bars, spoke in low, measured tones. He confirmed Washington's suspicions about the dynamic between Marcus Jones and Jamal Hayes. It was, as Books put it, a classic prison arrangement amplified by Marcus's domineering personality. Marcus had claimed Jamal early on, offering protection from the general population in exchange for absolute loyalty and submission, which, Books made clear, explicitly included coerced sexual favors. Jamal, young and terrified, had little choice but to comply. This grim confirmation painted Jamal less as a potential suspect and more as another victim of Marcus's reign. Then Books dropped a revelation that significantly complicated the picture. He spoke of a long-rumored, deeply hidden relationship between Marcus Jones and Officer Frank Miller. It wasn't common knowledge, kept under wraps for years, but Books insisted it was real. He described it as a complex entanglement, far removed from any notion of affection, rooted instead in a volatile mix of mutual exploitation, power struggles, and perhaps a strange, possessive dependency. Marcus, the inmate kingpin, held leverage over Miller through shared secrets or past transgressions, while Miller, the corrupt officer, likely derived some form of power or benefit from the association. This threw Miller's earlier irritation when discussing Marcus and Jamal into a new light. It might not have been mere professional disapproval, but the sting of personal jealousy or resentment. Books also corroborated the whispers about Marcus's involvement in illicit activities beyond simple extortion. He confirmed that Marcus controlled a significant portion of the contraband medication flow within Northgate. Painkillers, sedatives, antibiotics, even drugs diverted from the infirmary. Marcus orchestrated the distribution network, setting prices and collecting profits, further cementing his power base. Armed with this new information, Detective Washington turned her attention to the prison's surveillance system archives, specifically requesting footage from the weeks leading up to the malfunction of the camera outside Cell 117. Hours were spent in a small monitoring room, the flickering screens displaying the monotonous, gray-green reality of prison life. She meticulously reviewed footage from corridors, common areas, the yard, and areas near workstations like the kitchen and laundry. The tedious work paid off. On several occasions, the cameras captured brief, furtive interactions between Officer Miller and Jamal Hayes. These meetings took place in blind spots or less monitored areas. A secluded corner of the recreation yard, a brief pause in a service corridor. The exchanges were quick, almost imperceptible. Miller would subtly pass a small, nondescript package or envelope to Jamal, who would quickly conceal it. Later recordings show Jamal meeting with Marcus, often during meal times or in the yard, engaging in brief conversations during which something small, consistent with what he received from Miller, would be discreetly passed to the older inmate. The visual evidence aligned perfectly with the information gleaned from books. The pieces clicked into place, forming a coherent picture of a well-established smuggling operation. Officer Miller was the conduit, abusing his position to bring contraband, likely medications, into the facility. Jamal Hayes, caught in Marcus's web of control and protection, served as the mule and possibly a low-level distributor, ferrying the goods from Miller to Marcus. Marcus Jones sat at the apex, the organizer and ultimate beneficiary, using the illicit drug trade to enhance his wealth and influence within the prison walls. The question of Dr. Evelyn Reed's involvement remained open. As head of the infirmary, she controlled access to legitimate medications. Was she aware of the diversion? Was she complicit, perhaps turning a blind eye in exchange for peace or a cut, or even actively facilitating the supply? Her professional position placed her potentially close to the heart of the operation, even if indirectly. By the end of this phase of the investigation, Detective Washington had moved far beyond the initial scenario of a simple cellmate homicide. The case had blossomed into a complex investigation involving potentially widespread corruption, illicit trafficking, and a dangerous intersection of forbidden personal relationships and criminal enterprise. Marcus Jones wasn't just a murdered inmate. He was the linchpin of a system, and his death threatened to unravel a web that implicated inmates and staff alike. The motives for his murder were multiplying, entwined with the secrets he held about the drug ring, his volatile relationship with Jamal, and the explosive hidden connection with Officer Miller, all further complicated by the recent devastating news of his HIV diagnosis. During a subsequent, carefully arranged conversation, Deshaun Books Williams provided Detective Washington with the most incendiary piece of information yet, a revelation that shifted the potential motives from greed and control to raw fear and betrayal. Books confided that Marcus Jones, reeling from his recent HIV diagnosis, had become fixated on one terrifying conclusion. He believed he had contracted the virus from Officer Frank Miller. According to the prison grapevine, whispers confirmed what Books now stated outright. Miller himself was HIV positive and had allegedly kept his status a closely guarded secret for years. Whether Marcus had known this before his own diagnosis or pieced it together afterwards wasn't clear, but the realization had ignited a firestorm. Consumed by rage and a sense of profound betrayal, Marcus had reportedly confronted Miller. The confrontation escalated into outright blackmail. Marcus threatened to expose everything: their long-hidden intimate relationship, Miller's deep involvement in the contraband medication ring, and, most devastatingly, Miller's deliberate concealment of his HIV status while potentially exposing others, including Marcus himself. Such revelations would mean immediate termination, public disgrace, and likely criminal charges for Miller, destroying his life both personally and professionally. Miller, suddenly vulnerable and cornered by the man he had perhaps once controlled or partnered with, found himself facing ruin. Armed with this explosive information, Detective Washington requested a formal interview with Officer Miller again. This time, the tone was different. Washington laid out the evidence she had gathered. The surveillance footage showing exchanges with Jamal Hayes, the corroborated accounts of his involvement in the smuggling operation, and, crucially, the information regarding his alleged HIV status and the subsequent blackmail attempts by Marcus Jones. Washington informed Miller she was seeking an official court order to access his confidential medical records based on the gravity of the situation and his potential involvement or knowledge related to the homicide. Faced with the undeniable evidence of the smuggling and the imminent official confirmation of his health status, Miller's composure finally cracked. The facade of the detached professional dissolved, revealing fear and desperation. He admitted to his participation in the medication smuggling scheme, acknowledging his role as the conduit for bringing the drugs into Northgate. He also, under duress, confirmed his long-term HIV-positive status. He even admitted to a past intimate relationship with Marcus Jones, characterizing it as complex and coercive. However, regarding the murder, Miller was adamant. He vehemently denied any involvement. He insisted he had been nowhere near D Block during the critical time window when Marcus was killed. He provided specific details of his patrol route in a different wing of the prison, names of colleagues who could verify his presence there, and pointed to the official duty logs. Washington made careful notes, knowing his alibi would need rigorous verification. While Miller clearly had a powerful motive, silencing Marcus to prevent utter ruin, his denial seemed forceful, and the potential alibi needed to be checked thoroughly. With Miller denying involvement and presenting a verifiable alibi, pending confirmation, Washington's focus shifted towards Dr. Evelyn Reed. The head physician controlled the prison's legitimate drug supply and was responsible for inmate health, including HIV testing and counseling. Her position offered opportunities for both corruption and knowledge of sensitive information. Washington initiated a quiet audit of the infirmary's pharmaceutical inventory and dispensing records, looking for discrepancies that might indicate diversion or theft. Simultaneously, she discreetly interviewed other medical staff. The investigation quickly bore fruit. Significant inconsistencies emerged between the quantities of certain high-demand medications ordered and those actually dispensed to inmates or accounted for in official records. Under pressure, a nervous medical orderly, Kevin Bellwether, confessed to his part in a scheme orchestrated by Dr. Reed herself. For months, they had been systematically diverting pharmaceuticals, painkillers, antibiotics, psychotropics. Small amounts were skimmed off large orders, records were falsified, and the stolen medications were then funneled out, some likely feeding the internal prison black market controlled by figures like Marcus Jones, while others were possibly sold externally. Bellwether insisted he only followed Dr. Reed's orders, terrified of losing his job. Confronted with Bellwether's confession and the damning inventory audit results, Dr. Reed's professional calm finally shattered. She admitted to orchestrating the theft of medications, driven perhaps by greed or pressure. More significantly, she confessed that Marcus Jones had indeed been blackmailing her as well. He had somehow discovered her illicit activities and threatened to expose her scheme unless she met his demands, likely for more diverted drugs, or perhaps assistance with influencing his medical reports for parole considerations. Cornered and desperate, Dr. Reed admitted to a shocking breach of ethics and confidentiality. In an attempt to deflect Marcus's attention and potentially incite conflict between him and Miller, she had subtly but deliberately steered Marcus's suspicions about the source of his HIV infection towards Officer Miller. She confirmed, hinting to the enraged Marcus that Miller's health status made him a likely source, knowing full well Miller's status was confidential, and that revealing it, even indirectly, was a grave violation. She claimed she had hoped this would embroil Marcus in a conflict with Miller, diverting his dangerous attention away from her own criminal activities. Her gamble, however, seemed to have backfired, potentially creating or exacerbating deadly tensions, without removing the threat Marcus posed to her own security. Both Officer Miller and Dr. Reed now stood clearly identified as having powerful, distinct motives for wanting Marcus Jones silenced permanently, entangled as they were in a lethal mix of blackmail, disease, forbidden relationships, and criminal conspiracy. Feeling that the sterile interviews and record checks might have missed something tangible, Detective Washington decided a more thorough, meticulous search of Cell 117 itself was warranted. The initial forensic sweep had collected standard evidence, but Washington possessed a keen intuition honed by years of experience. Sometimes the most crucial clues were hidden in plain sight, overlooked in the initial chaos. She returned to the cell, now quiet and empty, the faint outline of where Marcus Jones's body had lain, still subtly visible on the concrete floor. Slowly, methodically, she began to examine every inch of the cramped space. She checked under the thin mattresses, ran her fingers along the metal bed frames, inspected the sparse personal belongings allowed to the inmates. A few worn books, letters, commissary receipts. It was under the lower bunk. Marcus's bunk, tucked away beneath a loose metal leg brace used to stabilize the aging frame, that her fingers brushed against something unexpected, a tightly folded piece of paper. Carefully extracting it, Washington unfolded the page. It was a single sheet torn from a standard prison-issue notebook, covered in Marcus Jones's distinctive, forceful handwriting. The script was jagged, angry, clearly written under duress. It was, unmistakably, a final message, penned sometime shortly before his death. In raw, unfiltered language, Marcus vented his bitterness and sense of betrayal. He wrote about being surrounded by liars and users. He named Dr. Reed, calling her a thief and manipulator, weaving her own corrupt schemes. He excoriated Officer Miller, labeling him a coward who had used him for years and likely infected him while hiding his own sickness. His words about Jamal Hayes were laced with a complex mixture of disillusionment and a strange, almost paternal disappointment, suggesting he suspected the young man was also playing his own game or had become entangled in plots against him beyond mere survival. Crucially, Marcus declared he hadn't been idle while facing his own mortality and the treachery around him. He stated he had compiled a detailed dossier on everyone involved in the corrupt network: Reed, Miller, the orderly Bellwether, others unnamed. He claimed to have documented the entire medication smuggling and theft operation: dates, amounts, names of complicit staff and inmates, transaction details. It was his insurance policy, his final act of vengeance against those who had wronged him. He ended the note by revealing the location of this damning evidence, hidden where books find peace, behind a specific ventilation grate near the old shelving units in the underused prison library. This discovery galvanized the investigation. Washington immediately secured a search warrant for the prison library. Accompanied by Warden Davis and a couple of guards, she proceeded directly to the location described in Marcus's note. Behind a dusty, seldom disturbed bookshelf filled with outdated reference volumes, they located the ventilation grate. Prying it open revealed a small cavity within the wall. Inside lay a thick envelope. Washington carefully retrieved it. The contents were exactly as Marcus had described. Pages filled with meticulous notes, names, dates, transaction logs, even crude diagrams outlining the flow of contraband. It was a comprehensive indictment of the corruption festering within Northgate, implicating Dr. Reed and Officer Miller at the center, along with Bellwether and potentially others. With concrete proof of the conspiracy and strong motives established for both Miller and Reed, Washington needed to pinpoint the killer. Miller's alibi, upon review of duty logs and corroborated witness statements from other guards, appeared solid. He was verifiably on duty in a separate wing during the estimated time of death. This left Dr. Reed as the prime suspect, but Washington still lacked direct evidence, placing her at the scene at the critical moment. She decided to re-examine the duty rosters in surveillance footage from the hours surrounding the murder, looking for any anomalies or overlooked details concerning staff movements near D Block. Her diligence paid off. Cross-referencing the duty logs with available camera footage, from angles not obscured by the taped lens, she noticed a discrepancy involving a young guard, Officer Chris O'Connell, who had been assigned to D Block that night. While the main corridor camera was blind, cameras covering adjacent hallways showed O'Connell briefly absent from his designated patrol area for a period overlapping with the estimated time of death. Brought in for questioning, O'Connell initially stuck to his official report. However, when confronted with the timeline discrepancy and pressed by Detective Washington, the young officer became visibly agitated. He finally admitted that late that evening, Dr. Reed had approached him urgently. She claimed she needed immediate access to Cell 117 to check on Marcus Jones, citing concerns about a severe adverse reaction to medication. Following protocol for a medical emergency requested by a physician, O'Connell unlocked the cell door for her. He stated he waited down the corridor for a few minutes while she was inside. Dr. Reed then emerged, appearing composed, informed him that the inmate was stable and sleeping, and instructed him not to disturb Jones until morning. O'Connell, trusting the physician's authority, logged nothing unusual and resumed his patrol. This was the breakthrough Washington needed. O'Connell's testimony placed Dr. Reed inside Marcus Jones's cell within the time frame of the murder. Washington immediately sought out Dr. Reed, finding her in her office packing personal belongings, having already been suspended due to the emerging medication theft scandal. Washington confronted her directly with O'Connell's statement and the discovery of Marcus's detailed exposé hidden in the library. The carefully constructed professional mask Dr. Reed wore finally crumbled. Trapped by the evidence, her composure evaporated, replaced by raw fear and desperation. She confessed. She admitted going to Marcus's cell that night, using the fabricated medical emergency as a pretext to gain access via Officer O'Connell. Her intention, she claimed, was to make one last desperate plea, to offer him money, anything, to buy his silence about her thefts. But Marcus, aware of his power and perhaps sensing his own end was near, had refused. He had allegedly laughed at her, told her it was too late, that his report naming everyone would be delivered to the warden first thing in the morning. He had been lying on his bunk, turned away from her. Seeing her life and career about to be destroyed, consumed by panic and rage, Dr. Reed confessed she impulsively grabbed a strip of cloth, perhaps a torn piece of bedding or ligature from his own belongings, and strangled him. She insisted it wasn't premeditated, but a spontaneous act born of sheer terror and desperation. The confession, delivered amidst tears and trembling, provided the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. Following her confession, Dr. Evelyn Reed was formally arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Marcus Jones. The news sent ripples of shock through Northgate, unsettling both staff and inmates who had viewed the physician as a figure of authority and care, however flawed the system. Her fall from grace was swift and absolute. The details of her crime laid bare by Detective Washington's meticulous investigation. She was transferred out of Northgate to await trial, her medical career in ruins, facing the grim prospect of spending years, possibly the rest of her life, on the other side of the bars she had once overseen. Officer Frank Miller, while cleared of direct involvement in the murder thanks to his verified alibi, could not escape the fallout from the unveiled corruption. He was immediately suspended from duty, pending a full internal affairs investigation and likely criminal charges. The evidence compiled by Washington, his role in the contraband smuggling ring, abuse of authority, the deliberate concealment of his HIV status, which potentially endangered others, and the unethical, possibly illegal relationship with an inmate, ensured his career in law enforcement was over. He faced disgrace, prosecution, and the loss of his pension, a steep price for his years of complicity and moral compromise. Kevin Bellwether, the medical orderly who had confessed to his role in the medication theft scheme under Dr. Reed's direction, struck a deal with the prosecution. In exchange for his full cooperation and testimony against Dr. Reed regarding both the thefts and potentially any relevant observations about her behavior leading up to the murder, he received assurances of a significantly reduced sentence for his involvement in the larceny. His cooperation was instrumental in solidifying the case against the former physician. Jamal Hayes found himself in a precarious legal position. During a final interview with Detective Washington, the fear that had gripped him since the discovery of Marcus's body finally gave way to a quiet admission. He confessed that upon returning from his kitchen shift around midnight, he had immediately sensed something was wrong. Though he hadn't seen the ligature mark in the dim light, Marcus's stillness, the unnatural angle of his body, the utter lack of sound, it all screamed death. He knew instinctively that Marcus was gone. However, paralyzed by shock and overwhelming fear, his mind had raced. He considered his own situation, his coerced relationship with Marcus, their recent tensions, fueled by Marcus's diagnosis and paranoia, his own role as a pawn in the smuggling operation. He became convinced that if he raised the alarm, suspicion would inevitably fall squarely on him. Who would believe his innocence? In that moment of panic, he made the fateful decision to feign ignorance, climb into his bunk, and pretend to sleep, hoping the body would be discovered by the guards in the morning, deflecting immediate scrutiny from himself. While not complicit in the murder itself, his failure to report the death immediately constituted a serious offense within the correctional system, potentially covering up a crime or failing to render aid, even if futile. Consequently, Jamal faced additional disciplinary action and likely an extension to his original sentence, a bitter consequence for a decision made under duress and terror. His future, already clouded by his initial conviction, became even more uncertain. With Dr. Reed's confession secured, Officer Miller facing charges, Bellwether cooperating, and Jamal Hayes' situation clarified, the official investigation into the murder of Marcus Jones drew to a close. Case files were compiled, reports were written, and the wheels of the justice system began to turn for those implicated. For Detective Lena Washington, however, the conclusion brought little sense of triumph, only a profound weariness. As she prepared her final report, she reflected on the tangled lives and tragic outcomes spawned within Northgate's walls. The case was a microcosm of the systemic issues that plagued such institutions: the insidious spread of corruption, the abuse of power by those in authority, the desperation and manipulation bred by confinement, the way old traumas and present fears could drive individuals to terrible acts. She thought of Marcus Jones, a man whose own brutality had ultimately not protected him from betrayal and a violent end. She thought of Officer Miller and Dr. Reed, individuals whose professional responsibilities had been corrupted by personal failings and criminal choices. And she thought especially of Jamal Hayes, a young life caught in multiple devastating currents, coerced into servitude, used as a pawn, and ultimately punished further for reacting out of fear within a system that offered him little genuine protection or hope. Leaving Northgate Correctional Facility behind, Detective Washington carried the weight of the case with her. It served as a stark reminder that her job often involved merely addressing the symptoms of a deeper societal malaise, reflected and magnified within prison walls. The cycle of violence, fear, and exploitation seemed relentless, trapping individuals not only behind physical bars, but also within invisible prisons of trauma and despair. The pursuit of justice felt incomplete, overshadowed by the harsh realities of a system struggling, and often failing, to achieve genuine rehabilitation or lasting change. The silence that had greeted Officer Miller that fateful morning in D Block had been broken, but the echoes of the tragedy would linger long after the gates of Northgate closed behind her.